Hello everyone, I hope you're all keeping well, healthy and happy. In this video I'm going to be talking about the Club of Rome. This is an organisation that I've mentioned before, but I've never gone into depth with who they are and what their ultimate aims are. And that's because I'm going to do that in this video. The Club of Rome is considered to be a global think tank, but in actuality it's a group of occultists, dark occultists, that have the absolute intention of bringing about hell on earth. That's the only way I can describe it. Among other things, they deal with the world's economic systems. You see, they have a lot of say in how governments conduct their business economically, and also how policies are shaped by various governments throughout this world. And they also have a lot of power and clout with the international banking cartels, which makes them profoundly powerful. They were founded in 1968 in Rome in Italy, and since July 1st, 2008, the organisation has had its headquarters in Winterthur in Switzerland, which is the same country in which the Bank of International Settlements, the BIS, is based. The principal founder of the Club of Rome was Aurelio Pecci. Pecci was born 4th July 1908 in Turin in Italy. He was an Italian scholar and an industrialist, and the first president of the club, which he created with Alexander King and Elizabeth Mann Borghese. Pecci graduated from the University of Turin with a degree in economics in 1930, and soon after went to the Sorbonne with a scholarship and was awarded a free trip to the Soviet Union, which was, if you'll recall, at that time communist. The relevance of that, by the way, will become apparent as this video goes on. During World War II, Pecci became involved in the then existing anti-fascist movement, which was primarily communist. In fact, Pecci himself admitted to the fact that he held communist ideals. But this Antifa movement, which existed back then, is not that different to the one which exists now, because the definition of fascism that they were using was the same one that was drawn up by Marcuse and Adorno. They redefined the term fascism, as I've explained previously, to take in anyone who was conservative in their viewpoints. So according to these communists, anyone who was conservative was a fascist, to make a long story very short. If you want a more in-depth explanation of this, feel free to check out my previous videos on these subjects. But very few people ever mention that the founder of the Club of Rome was an out-and-out communist. It's just something interesting, isn't it? Pecci also threw his energies into ADELA, that is the Atlantic Development of Latin America organization. This was an international consortium of bankers who were looking at industrializing Latin America. If you take a look at the mess that has erupted in Latin America, you can actually trace all these problems back to ADELA, the Atlantic Development of Latin America organization, these bankers and what they came up with. And they threw their support behind Pecci and consequently behind the Club of Rome. That should tell you something. You should be very worried by that. Incidentally, as an aside, what you'll frequently notice is that these international banking cartels are designed to work hand in hand with communism to destroy Western civilization. Okay? And these links go back decades. Right? These links between communism and international banking go back decades. It's not a new thing. But Pecci was asked to give the keynote speech for ADELA in Spanish at the group's first meeting in 1965, which directly led to the creation of the Club of Rome, because Pecci's speech caught the attention of Dean Rusk, who was then American Secretary of State. Why is this important, you might wonder? Well, because I've spoken previously about how the United States of America and its Department of State, the State Department, was very heavily infiltrated by Soviet communist spies. To give concrete examples of this, Alger Hiss, who went on to basically create the United Nations for all intents and purposes. Right? The United Nations is not an innocuous organisation. It's actually profoundly dangerous and, I would say, malevolent in what it wants to accomplish. But Alger Hiss was instrumental in that. He, of course, later admitted to being a communist. The same thing is true of another chap that was in the State Department by the name of Henry Dexter White. I've spoken about both these gentlemen before, but if you're new to my work, then you need to check these people out. Because Henry Dexter White essentially created the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank, which are overseen by the Bank of International Settlements. Okay? So these banking cartels were created by the communists. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. It's genuinely true. All you need to do is look into it a little bit and you'll see that. And the same thing is true of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve Act, which created the central bank in the United States. It's about as federal as a porcupine, right? But it's one of those things, a lot of people don't understand that, even today. Despite the reams of information that have been presented to them, they still don't understand this. The Federal Reserve is not federal at all. It's designed to ensnare people in perpetual debt. Anyway, so Dean Rusk, the then American Secretary of State, had Pecci's speech translated into English and distributed at various meetings in Washington. Now, a Soviet representative, here's where it gets really interesting, and this is why I was saying the links between Pecci and the Soviet Union are so intricate that it's unbelievable that people don't understand any of this. So the Soviet representative at the annual meeting of the United Nations Advisory Committee on Science and Technology, ACAST, this was a gentleman by the name of Germain Gvishiani, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who was Alexei Kosygин's son-in-law and the vice chairman of the State Committee on Science and Technology of the Soviet Union. He read the speech and he was so taken by it that he decided he should invite the author to come for private discussions outside of Moscow. Gvishiani then asked an American colleague on ACAST, Carol Wilson, about Pecci. Now, Wilson did not know Pecci, but he and Gvishiani both knew Alexander King, who then made the introductions. And Alexander King was the Director General for Scientific Affairs for the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, in Paris. So Wilson appealed to him for information so that he could get in touch with Pecci. And King himself, as it turned out, didn't directly know Pecci, but he was very, very impressed by the Adela paper and tracked down the author via the Italian embassy. So King wrote to Pecci, and King passed on Pecci's address to Gvishiani, who then invited him to the Soviet Union. After the meeting in 1968, there was an informal gathering of a few people in Pecci's home, which included Eric Jantsch, who was one of the great methodologists of planning studies. And you'll see what that's leading up to later on. Alexander King, Hugo Timon, Laurent Gomez, Philo, Jean Saint-Jour and Max Constam were all in attendance. According to King, within an hour they decided to call themselves the Club of Rome. These are all the guys that basically were responsible for the Club of Rome coming into being directly. I'll be posting their names and what have you in the description, as well as perhaps even a comment, as I typically do with these kind of in-depth videos, just so that people can soak the information in their own time. In 1972, Pecci was one of the principal founders of the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, the IIASA, in Laxenburg, near Vienna in Austria. The institute was formed after a considerable struggle because the governments of the West didn't want it to come into being in any real sense. However, they forced their way into being, and they served as the carrier pigeons, if you like, of the Soviet bloc in order to try and persuade the West to adopt communist ideals, communist policies. That, by the way, is why you see that these central banks, we were talking about the central banking systems and the governments, why they're always pushing for Keynesian economic models, which are socialist and communist by nature. They lead to bigger government, they lead to more state control, and eventually state totalitarianism. In February 1974 in Salzburg in Austria, Pecci persuaded Austrian Chancellor Bruno Kreisky to host a meeting. Besides Bruno Kreisky, the following heads of state of government were also present: Leopold Senghor, the President of Senegal; Luis Echevarria, the President of Mexico; Joop den Uyl, the Prime Minister of the Netherlands; Olaf Palme, the Prime Minister of Sweden; Pierre Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, and the representatives of the Prime Ministers of Algeria and Ireland. The nature and contents of the meeting have never been disclosed, and to encourage the participants to speak freely, they were asked to come without accompanying civil servants, and they were assured that nothing they said would be attributed to them. The interesting thing there is that Pierre Trudeau, of course, the Prime Minister of Canada, followed the dictates of the Club of Rome. And his son, Justin Trudeau, is the current Prime Minister of Canada, and he has shifted the political paradigm in Canada far to the left. We're talking radical left territory. We're talking violent radical left territory. We're talking the destruction of Canada. And a lot of people in the West who are socialists, who are communists, are doing exactly the same thing. In the political arena particularly, as well as other areas. Now, as a logical extension of the Salzburg meeting, Pecci asked Jan Tinbergen to produce a follow-up report on global food and development policies. Scholars from the first, second and third worlds were invited to participate in the Reshaping the International Order project, or RIO for short. This reshaping of the international order is analogous with the New World Order. Now, a lot of people don't understand this point, by the way, that the New World Order is very, very real. It is not a myth. Okay, I'm stating that as a fact. I'm telling you this. Now, you can read the published works of the people responsible for the creation of socialism, for the creation of communism, and you will see, and I've talked about this before, you will see that they distinctly mention creating a new world order. So people need to snap out of this nonsense of, oh, it's just a conspiracy theory. It's not. It's a reality. It's being done right around you right now. And it's been ongoing for decades. A report published for the project called for a more equitable distribution of global wealth, which is again a communist ideal, utopianism. In real terms, it means the devaluation of national currencies through mass taxation and the dumping of those currencies, which is exactly what we're seeing. After numerous working sessions and presentations over an 18-month period, the final results of RIO, that is the Reshaping the International Order, were presented at a meeting in Algiers in October 1976 and accepted by the Club of Rome. The last meeting Pecci organised and participated in was in Bogota in Colombia between the 15th and 17th of December 1983. Again, the contents of that meeting were never disclosed. But at that meeting was not only Pecci, but the President of Colombia, Belisario Betancourt. Pecci died on the 14th of March 1984 in Rome. In 1991, the club published the following paper called The First Global Revolution, This is very important. Let me repeat that so that you can read it for yourself. The first global revolution, it was published in 1991 by the Club of Rome. It purportedly analyzes the problems of humanity. But what's interesting about it is that it actually calls human beings, in essence, problematic. I'm going to read you a passage from it. Historically, social or political unity has commonly been motivated by enemies in common. The need for enemies seems to be a common historical factor. Some states have striven to overcome domestic failure and internal contradictions by blaming external enemies. The ploy of finding a scapegoat is as old as mankind itself. When things become too difficult at home, divert attention to adventure abroad. Bring the dividing nation together to face an outside enemy, either a real one or else invented for the purpose. The sudden absence of traditional adversaries has left governments and public opinion with a great void to fill. New enemies have to be identified, new strategies imagined, and new weapons devised. But in designating these dangers as the enemy, we fall into the trap which we have already warned readers about, namely mistaking symptoms for causes. All these dangers are caused by human intervention in natural processes, and it is only through changed attitudes and behaviour that they can be overcome. The real enemy then, and this is the key phrase in this, which illustrates the problem with the Club of Rome, the real enemy then is humanity itself. That is according to the Club of Rome. They view humanity as their enemy. Now that's a genocidal position to hold, of course. Right? It genuinely is. It's insane. Right? It's what leads to mass murder, and you'll see what I'm getting at as we go on with this. The club also stated in another publication called Goals for Mankind that the ideal sustainable population is hence more than 500 million, but less than 1 billion. That's according to the Club of Rome. What's disturbing about that is that the current population is approximately 7.2 billion. How do you get it to just over 500 million? There's only a few ways you can do that. Right? And most of those ways include genocide. Okay, they include mass murder. And the Club of Rome is informing government decisions. I want you to understand this. Okay, the Club of Rome is informing government policies and decisions. They're responsible for creating all the problems we're seeing, for example, in Latin America, as I mentioned. They're also responsible for the mass suffering that is going on the African continent. They may well, in fact, be responsible because they were talking about the creation of these real and unreal enemies. They may well be responsible for international terrorism through their machinations. Because what they're fundamentally talking about, I mean, reread this, right, and you'll see this. What they're talking about is social engineering, changing attitudes and behaviours of human beings. I mean, that is social engineering. In 2001, the Club of Rome established a think tank called TT30, comprising of around 30 men and women between the ages of 25 and 35. And this little think tank, this sub-think tank, aimed to identify and solve the problems from a younger perspective. This is what I was talking about. This massive system which has been imposed on mankind as a tyrannical system is actually designed as a filtration system. So those whose ideals align with theirs, people who are as psychopathic as they are, basically, right? They're the ones that they suck to the top of the food chain. Okay, they're extracted from society through these kinds of sub-think tanks like TT30. Do you understand why I've been telling you all the stuff that I've been telling you, preparing you? It's taken me 1.5 years to do this, to get to a point where I can start talking about the Club of Rome and the Fabian Society and the actual overall New World Order communist agenda. These people are mass murderers. Okay? But they'll use these buzzwords like sustainable development, which are a part of a persuasion system designed to render innocuous the true horror of the UN's Agenda 21. This is not conjecture, this is fact. All you need to do is read the papers that they've published. Okay? Just read the reports published by these institutions and these think tanks, and you'll see what the heck I've been talking about. You will see it is absolutely true. One final thing I'll say about this, and it's not something people think about all too often, but I think it needs to be said, because we're living in a very, very confused time. See, there are profoundly evil people walking this earth. And they get away with doing what they do because they hide behind this garb of good, acting holier than thou. Okay? This virtue signalling nonsense, when in real terms, they're just hiding their own psychopathy. As for me, here's the thing that you have to understand when it comes to the average human being. I know I'm bad to the bone. I've done terrible things in my life, as we all have in many respects. Okay, we all make mistakes, we all falter. Okay, I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just a man. But I have my own moral code. And I try to make sure that it aligns with natural law, which is in today's society completely separate from man's law. Okay? And there's a quote I'd like to read to you from Robert Browning to close this video off. That's all we expect of man this side of the grave. His good is knowing he is bad. You have to integrate your shadow side into the whole part of yourself. You have to know that you're capable of great evil or great badness. And these people haven't done that. These psychopaths haven't even looked at themselves in self-reflection to prevent themselves from doing things that could potentially be catastrophic and certainly are immoral. Anyway, I'll leave it there for this video, but I hope that's been informative in some sense for you. Thank you very much for watching. Take good care of yourselves, and God bless all of you.